Hello. I'm Judy Kupperman, member of the Program Committee. And today I'm very privileged to introduce our keynote speaker, Catherine Herridge. I think we all remember Mrs. Herridge as the key player in investigative correspondence, first with ABC, then Fox, for what was it, 20 years? 23 years, and most recently CBS. She's a Harvard and Columbia grad and has received numerous impressive awards, such as an Emmy, Congressional Medal of Honor, Tex McCrary Award, and the Society of Environmental Journalists Kevin Carmody Award. Over the years, her investigations have helped create legislation improving the lives of over 1 million veterans and civilians. The Camp Lejeune Justice Act and the PACT Act, as well as an executive order on health hazards studied by the Defense Department. Her ongoing investigation into the crippling effects of directed energy weapons, which we know as Havana Syndrome, has also allowed government employees impacted to continue receiving health care benefits. Recently, she had an interview with our very favorite Senator Marco Rubio, now Secretary of State, and we have a short clip to play. Where is he?
We spoke exclusively with Secretary Marco Rubio about his first 30 days leading the State Department. He revealed new details about the U.S.-Russia talks, direct engagement with Ukraine, the U.S. proposal for Gaza, plus Iran, China, and the emerging role of independent media. This is our full, unedited interview with the Secretary.
Secretary Rubio, thank you for the opportunity.
And there you have it. But I'm sure you can pull it up on YouTube to see the full story. Catherine has had to make some very tough decisions in her life, both personal and professional. You'll hear her story today, and I know you will be both surprised and shocked. So may we give a warm Naples welcome to Catherine Herridge.
I don't go anywhere without my notebook and my pen, as you know. All right, well, thank you very much for having me, Charlie and Judy. I really appreciate the invitation, and thank you for all of you being so welcome today. I thought we could have a conversation about the First Amendment, a free press, and new media. But first, I think you have to understand some of my backstory. I grew up in corporate media. My very first job 37 years ago was at ABC News in London. And I had just graduated from Harvard, and awkwardly, I had no job. And I knew I wanted to be a journalist. And you know, when you're 22 or 23, you think big. And I thought, you know, if I could go overseas, it looks, foreign news looks sexy and exciting. I'm going to go do that. And I'm a dual US-Canadian citizen. And I got a working holiday visa as a Canadian. And I went to London. And I literally was cold calling people from those, you know, the phone booths in London. And I knocked on doors, and finally, I received an unpaid internship at ABC News in London, and I felt that I had won the lottery. I didn't have a lot of money, but as my father assured me, if I couldn't get a job with my Harvard degree, I knew how to type, and I would never starve because I knew how to type. So my first job there was unpaid, and I was able to parlay that into a paying job. And I was what's called a desk assistant, and this is the entry-level position in these networks. It's like being in the mailroom if you're in an advertising agency or a talent agency. And so it involved answering phones, photocopying, faxing, delivering newspapers, and then making coffee. And my father said, "Is that really what a Harvard degree buys?" And I said, "Well, it's got me in the door, and I need to just get my foot in the door." And the great thing about that job is that I had to learn who everybody was, because part of my job was putting their information into the computer system, like where the correspondents were and the producers and the crews, and it really was a ground-up view of how a news organization worked. And if you think back to the late 80s, ABC News just had a huge presence overseas. The London bureau was probably 150 people, and they had bureaus in Paris and Rome and Frankfurt and Cairo and Tel Aviv and Moscow. I mean, it was just sort of a legendary place. And I spent about 9 years there. And I worked my way up from the very bottom. I did different production jobs. I worked in radio. And I worked in radio for some time because the company's ethos was that you had to have a good voice and a good delivery, and you had to learn how to report and to do interviews. And some of the biggest names there, like Peter Jennings, had spent considerable time in radio. And I had one interaction with Peter Jennings I'm going to share with you. I was just a new desk assistant, and World News Tonight came to London. And they set up on the top floor of the office something called the RIM, which was the executive table. And my job was to do the photocopying and the faxing and everything. And I was very nervous. And I was asked to do something, and I said, "I'm just going to go out for a minute." And he's like, "Wait a second. Say that again." I was like, "I'm just going to go out." He's like, "Are you Canadian?" I said, "I'm busted, I am." And so in the small world category, the short story is, it turned out we had both spent time in Toronto, that's where I grew up, and he said to me, "You know that skating rink at that park, did you drink behind the rink too?" I'm not going to give you what the answer was, but it was, it had such a great family atmosphere, that office. And one of the people that stood out to me at that time was Jack Lawrence. I don't know if any of you remember Jack Lawrence, very famous correspondent. He was in Vietnam, and if my memory serves me correctly, he also had worked at CBS. And he sat me down, God bless him, and I was not very old, and he said, "Let me show you how to make a great TV story." And he said, "You have to sit in the edit room, you have to watch the entire interview, you have to pick out the highlights from the interview, you have to look at all the video, and then you have to listen to the video to find the natural sound. And your job as the correspondent is to take this mosaic and to pull it all together so you use the best material." I still use that process to this day that I learned in that office. By 1996, I was getting a little, impatient. I had started to do TV at ABC, but I really wanted to hit the road and travel and be a foreign correspondent. And one of the correspondents suggested that I should apply to this upstart cable channel, Fox. She didn't know if it was Fox or Fox News or 20th Century Fox. And she said, "You should definitely apply. They're looking for a London correspondent." And she said, sort of prophetically, "If you get that job, you're going to be the only show in town. You're going to go everywhere." So I faxed. I'm very good at faxing at this point. I faxed my resume to a gentleman called Ian Ray, who was an Australian. And he called me and said, "If you're in New York, we'd like to do an interview." And you know how life is sometimes with the timing. So I was going to be in New York, and I went to see Ian at the Fox headquarters on 6th Avenue. And I sort of was ushered upstairs, and I'd been living overseas for a while, so I didn't know a lot about sort of the media universe in New York. And he's like, "You're going to be interviewed with Raja." And I was like, "Who?" He's like, "Raja." I was like, okay. So I get to this corner office. There are boxes everywhere. I mean, it's really a work in progress. And of course, it was Roger Ailes. And I sat down, and he told me about his political career and how he had done consulting with different leaders overseas. And we got to the end of the interview, and he said to me, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, no, but I have a few things I'd like to say. He's like, sort of looked at me very surprised. And I said, well, I'm sitting here on this massive couch in this corner office, and I'm looking at your business card, and that looks to me like it's a gold business card holder shaped like a fox. And it says chairman and CEO. So I hope the interview has gone well. I think it's gone pretty well. And he sort of smiled, and I said, listen, if you want to make me an offer, you got to make it like today or tomorrow or early next week. Not when you feel like it, like in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 months, because I'm redoing my deal with ABC, so it's like right now. And yeah, I think about it now, I feel a little hot. And he smiled and he said, how much are they paying you? And I said, no, what does your job pay? He goes, I need people like you. So I left my interview with Raja, and it was the old days, so I went to a phone booth on 6th Avenue, and I called my agent, and he said, how did it go? And I said, I think it went pretty well. He's like, what do you mean? Like, how well? I said, I think we're going to get an offer, like maybe today. And it was either that evening or the next day that they faxed me an offer, and that's how it began. And my ABC colleague was right. I went everywhere in that office. If you think about sort of 1996 to 1998, 99, it was the Northern Ireland peace agreement. I was in the former Yugoslavia. I was in Iraq. I was all over Europe. I was in India. I've traveled to Moscow. And of course, there was Princess Diana. And just to tell you a little anecdote about that, it was very early in the morning, maybe 1 or 2 o'clock. And again, Fox was very new. You would ask for interviews and you'd say, you know, Fox News, America Fox, not 20th Century Fox, like the movies, but like TV. And it was really an exciting period because we would try a lot of different things, and there was no hand-wringing. If it didn't work, you just would move on to the next thing. So the phone rang, and I answered, and it was unusual to get a phone call at 1 or 2 in the morning. And no one really had cell phones then, really. We had beepers. And the news desk said, John Moody, and he was one of the executives, John Moody says, go to Paris now. I said, okay, what's happened? He's like, there was a big car accident and Dodi is dead. I was like, wow. I didn't know Americans were so interested in Dodi Fayed at this point. He'd had this big vacation with Princess Diana, you know, in the Mediterranean. And I said, well, I'll go as soon as I can, because of course nothing in Europe moves overnight. So I was going to wait till about the 6 a.m. flight. And I said, is there anything else I should know? And the person on the news desk said, they were at the Ritz. The car was like driving really fast along the Sini River, and then there was a crash into a pillar, and Dodi is dead. I was like, okay. He's like, and Princess Diana, she was in the car too. I was like, okay, so we're burying the headline. And I spoke with one of the executives in the middle of the night, and we were a tiny, tiny operation. I think there were 4 or 5 of us in the London office. And of course, the networks had, 20, 30, 40 people. And we were trying to figure out how we would cover this and how we would split up our group of 4. And 2 would stay in London and the other 2 would go to Paris. And the executive said, we're getting reports that she's okay and she's walking around and she has a broken arm. But of course, if she's dead, Catherine, that will be a different story. And when he said that, I had that feeling, the feeling that you get. And then I spent, it was at least 6 months in Paris. And I'll never forget the morning that she died. And we went to the Pont d'Alma, which is, that big golden flame over the tunnel. And I remember thinking to myself, because the French police have a very different strategy than our police, which is that they open up a roadway as quickly as possible. And I remember thinking that really it was a crime scene, and people were going down into that tunnel and they were taking away souvenirs, from the pillar. Anyway, that's a memory I had, and that was the beginning. I traveled all over. I saw so much history unfold, and it was really a golden period because the network was new and it was vibrant and it was not risk averse. And if you tried things and they failed, there was really not a lot of hand wringing. Everybody moved on. I came back to New York, and in 2001, I was there when 9/11 happened. And I just want to tell you a little story about 9/11 because it's always stayed with me, and it's one of those stories I'm still meaning to do. I was in a live shot position, not maybe about twice, 3 times the size of this stage, and all of the reporters were on Apple boxes. So we were all just inches apart. And every time the top of the hour came or the half hour came, the sound that came up out of that group was just a sort of a frightening, shrill sound with everything else that was going on. And I was standing on my box, and you couldn't move usually for about 4 hours. You were in that position. And I saw this woman coming down towards our live shot position, and we were near the old Building 7. And she was scraping the ash off the top of the cars, which of course were abandoned and had belonged to people who were killed in the towers, into a shoebox. And I got her attention, and I went over and spoke to her, and I asked her what she was doing, and she explained that if I remember it correctly, her sister had traveled to New York for a business meeting, and she'd had breakfast at Windows on the World, which was the restaurant on the top of the World Trade Center. And she had driven a couple of days, all day and all night with the traffic from Chicago. And she said, I can't go back to Chicago without something to bury. And I realized in that moment that the ash really all over the city was the people and the remains of the buildings. And I saved an envelope of that ash. And one of these days, I'm going to get it analyzed because I'm certain we're going to find out that the air was not safe, as we were all told at the time. And anyway, 9/11 was a defining moment for me. I went down to Washington. In fact, I got a call from Raja, and he's like, listen, we need someone to go down to Washington and cover Homeland Security. I don't know what the hell that is, but you to go figure it out. So I got on the train, and once again, I stayed there. I stayed there so long in a hotel, then a corporate apartment. I think they forgot that I still lived in New York. Like after 2 years, I said, I'm still in the corporate apartment. I still live in New York, and they sort of tidied that up. Anyway, but that was as a journalist, this was a really exciting period. It was like, drinking through a fire hose, just all of the history that you saw. And so I stayed at Fox. It was 23 years I was there. So I really took the skills I learned at ABC, and then this was the place where they were really allowed to grow. And I learned how to do a live shot, obviously. I don't know, I've probably done a couple 100,000, in my career. It's great training to get focused and speak without a script. And in 2019, I got a job offer to go to CBS. And I mentioned Jack Lawrence earlier. I've always felt of CBS as, of the 3 big networks, that it was most focused on enterprise reporting. And I was so excited to have this opportunity because I was 55. And when I started working, I never imagined that I would still be in TV at 55. Most of the women who I looked up to when I started, had kind of washed out in their early 40s. So it was surprising to me that I was still working. And it said a lot about CBS that they were recognizing my experience when they hired me. So I felt very, very positive about that. And I was going to do more investigations. And I was super excited about sort of moving out of just everyday live programming and doing more investigations. I think the first moment that I felt things were amiss was in October of 2020. And in October of 2020, I was asked by a senior executive at CBS, Ingrid Cyprian-Matthews, to get confirmed reporting from the Hunter Biden laptop. And I was able to get a handful of records that I authenticated, including $1 million retainer from a Chinese executive. And I provided the information to the executive, and then it just kind of seemed to disappear into this black hole. And I remember watching Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes, and she was interviewing President Trump, and she said to him that the laptop can't be verified. And I really felt kind of sick, because I thought, well, no, wait a minute. And I was able to authenticate some of these records, and like, is this a network where the left doesn't know what the right is doing? Like what really happened there? And then Nora O'Donnell, who at that time was the anchor of the evening news, asked candidate Joe Biden if the laptop was Russian disinformation. And this was strange to me, because I had been asked to get the research for Nora. And I thought, did she never get my reporting, or is she just ignoring my reporting? It took me 2 years to get a forensic review of the laptop on CBS, and to their credit, the morning program did that. And we went to a lot of trouble to get the cleanest chain of custody for the laptop data, because I wanted this story to be totally locked down for CBS. There were various copies of the laptop data, but I wanted something that had never been touched. And I took a lot of grief at that time from other outlets who didn't know the whole story of what had happened. But I thought it was important for us to get on the record about the laptop. And the forensic review, so much information was revealed in the forensic review. I felt there were so many more stories we could do. It revealed that Joe Biden had been using more than a half dozen personal emails accounts. And if you think back to that period, like let's say 2014, 2016, if you had a personal email account, maybe you had one, and then you had like a work account. You didn't have 6 or 7. I thought, we should do a story on that he had so many accounts, and why did he need so many accounts? And I was told, well, we need to know what the content of the email is, and this was a years-long process. We were never going to get to that story. And unfortunately, in the text messages sent by Hunter Biden, there was a very liberal use of the N-word. And I thought that was a story too. And I was told, well, he's an addict. It seems, wrong to do a story about that because of his addiction. And I was thinking, when you're high like that, the filter's off, like that's who you are. We should do this story. It's a story worth doing. We did not do that story. And I was asked by a very senior executive at CBS, George Cheeks. He's in charge of news, entertainment, and sports, specifically to do the Hunter Biden story. So I didn't volunteer for this assignment. I was given it. And he said to me that his boss, Shari Redstone, really wanted to see accountability reporting on both sides of the aisle. So there's a huge controversy right now about 60 Minutes, but to Shari Redstone's credit, she's wanted to have more even-handed or balanced reporting at CBS, at least from my experience, for 6 years. I met resistance to this reporting. But if there was a turning point, it was in August, not August, it was the summer of 2023, and it was the plea agreement in Delaware. I don't know how many of you remember that. Leading up to the plea agreement, there were lots of discussions about how it was all going to unfold. And Hunter Biden's legal team, I was told by one of the producers, was planning to have a live position for him, so after the plea deal was done, he could come out and kind of give his address to the nation. And I was on this conference call, and I was the downer. I said, I'm telling you, there's so many irregularities about this plea deal. I would really have a plan B. Like, it could go sideways, be ready. And the plea deal, for those of you who are familiar with the courts, something like this would have to be filed 30 days out, especially a high-profile plea deal, because they want to have a lot of sunlight on the deal, a lot of scrutiny. I mean, the night before, it wasn't even filed. And there was a lot of antics, I'll say, with transcripts that had been provided to the court from these IRS whistleblowers. And I'll never forget sitting in that courtroom when it was clear that this deal was going to die in the courtroom. The judge, Mary Ellen Norica, asked very, very basic questions about the deal, and very quickly just was able to pull the threads, and it started unraveling. I mean, this was not a typical plea agreement. And after the plea agreement fell apart, we had a conference call at CBS, and I was asked what I thought would happen next. And I said, it's very straightforward. It's going to be felony gun charges. It's going to be felony tax. That's going to be California. That's a much more serious case because it's going to implicate other family members, and they're going to look at the foreign lobbying laws, and that could be the father as well. And that really, to me, was the moment when I felt kind of the temperature drop in the room. You know, it was no longer sort of make-believe. It was like real. It was going to happen. To CBS's credit, they allowed us to do the whistleblower interviews. I mean, we put those interviews on CBS, and I still to this day think that those were the stories that really blew the whole thing wide open. And I did some terrific reporting at CBS that impacted, 1 million veterans and their families. So we did some tremendous work. But the Hunter Biden story was, a disappointment in the end. And in February last year, I was given another popular story, which was the Robert Hur report. And you all know that's the report into the mishandling of classified information. And the way these things work is that there's sort of an embargo on the report. You're allowed to sort of read it and start to write, and then the embargo lifts and you can start reporting on it. And I remember turning to the producer as I headed out to the live position, because when you're doing a special report, the words just come out of your mouth. Nobody is reviewing what you're going to say in advance. You have to just explain what the facts are as you know them. And I looked at him and I said, I just want to make sure we're on the same page, that he found that he was essentially, mentally, so mentally sort of impaired or declined that he couldn't be prosecuted. He's like, yep, that's the story. And it was, about 3 or 4 days after that, I think that was a Tuesday, when my job was eliminated for cost-cutting concerns, or as my friends like to say, you were fired for committing the crime of journalism. They give you what's called a one sheet, which kind of lays out the terms of your separation. And the one sheet, once an investigator, always an investigator. So I went into the metadata on the one sheet to see when it was created. And it was created the Friday after the Robert Hur report at 5 o'clock. Anyway, my view has always been that I'm grateful for the work, and a corporation, if they don't want you to work there, that is totally their call, okay? That's totally their call. But when CBS News seized my reporting records and my reporting notes and files, this was a red line that should never be crossed by any news organization. I testified to Congress that when the network of Walter Cronkite seizes your reporting files, it's an attack on investigative journalism. And in my view, it was like a journalistic rape. That's how serious it was. And to their credit, my union that represents television performers, television correspondents, SAG-AFTRA, completely went to bat for me on this First Amendment principle and the importance of protecting a reporter's notes and confidential sources. And if the union had not got behind me, I don't think I would ever have had my notes returned. And Jonathan Turley, who some of you may know, he wrote a tremendous story about the First Amendment principles and sort of this violation of what is really one of the most confidential pledges that you can ever make as a journalist. And then finally, that same February, all within about, I think it's 17 days, I lost my job, my files were seized, and then I was held in contempt of court for refusing to disclose confidential reporting sources in a series of national security stories that I had done at Fox News. And as I testified to Congress, if you don't have that pledge of confidentiality to your sources, your investigative toolbox is empty as a reporter. My case is in the DC Appellate Court right now because we appealed the district court order to disclose. The order to disclose also requires me to pay fines of $800 a day that can escalate over time, and I'm grateful that's been paused until there's a decision at the appellate court. But whatever is decided in my case, because it's so much bigger than me and so much bigger than a network or any story, is going to set the rules of the road for every working journalist in the United States. And I am so grateful to Fox News because they have given me a very deep, a very sophisticated, a very expensive defense of these First Amendment principles. And if you were working independently or you are a small digital newsroom, you would never be able to withstand the legal and the financial pressure of a case like this. So, after all of that, I had to make some decisions about working again. And I had some generous job offers to go back, very similar to the type of work that I had been doing at Fox News. But I had a chance meeting with a very successful entrepreneur, and he looked at my situation and he said, Catherine, don't go back, go forward, okay? Go and report independently. Make yourself your own brand. And this was an intriguing idea to me because the marketplace is shifting. I mean, the sand is shifting under everyone's feet right now. Tucker Carlson, called me after I was fired, and he said something to the effect of, "Welcome to the club." And he's like, "I know you don't want to belong, but in a year you're going to think it's great." So he also encouraged me to work independently, and I think we're at this incredible moment in the media. And I say this again as someone who grew up in corporate media. I am the product of corporate media. But a dynamic has completely changed in this last election cycle. I like to say that this is the election where X, Twitter, as many of you may know it, and Joe Rogan broke the back of 60 Minutes. I never thought I would see an election where a candidate for president wouldn't sit down with 60 Minutes, but we saw that in this election, and he actually reached more people by being on Joe Rogan, because people's news consumption has really changed. And I think that it's easy to explain. It's this sort of intersection of a loss of public trust in the media and the sophistication of the technology in these new platforms. So 10 or 15 years ago, if you didn't like what you were watching or you didn't really trust what you were watching, the cost of changing was great, or it was just difficult. You didn't know where else to go. Today, if you don't like what you're seeing or you're not trusting what you're seeing, you're on your phone, you just flip to something else. And you're seeing incredible growth on these platforms. Believe me, it's the Wild West, but you're seeing incredible growth, and then you're just seeing the steady decline in the audiences on, I'll say, traditional media, so cable news, TV news. And I wrote something on my website, which was called Legacy Media's Dinosaur Extinction. And I wonder if this is the asteroid that we've just encountered for legacy media. In this marketplace, once a consumer of your content leaves, they're probably never coming back. When I worked in cable news, what I came to learn over time is that even if you had a great product, you couldn't necessarily bring people to your channel. You had to wait for them to be frankly pissed off with what they were watching, and then they would sample you, and you had about 75 seconds to convince them to stay. And one of the reasons Fox grew over time is that there were big events. There was the Florida recount, then there was 9/11, and I don't know how many of you remember the DC sniper story. It was Princess Diana's death, the DC sniper story, and if I remember correctly, the DC sniper story was the story in which it went past CNN. So what happened is every time there's a big event, people would sample Fox, and a certain percentage would stay. So it doesn't matter how good your product is, you have to wait for the consumer to try you. And I think in this marketplace now, once people leave, they're really probably never coming back. So I work independently. There are pluses and minuses. Anyone who tells you it's easy or it's easy to monetize is not being truthful with you. It's very challenging. But it's allowed me to do stories I couldn't do before. That's my mission statement, telling them the stories that I couldn't tell before. And our first story was on COVID vaccine injury in the US military. And that's the website. I do a weekly newsletter. And then on X, it's pretty easy. It's Catherine _Herridge. And we thought long and hard about where we would put our first story. And we landed on X because we had the least fear of censorship of that particular topic. The COVID vaccine injury story was about a 23-year-old soldier who'd had a very, very bad reaction to the mRNA vaccine and had 3 heart attacks and a mini stroke and required a pacemaker at 23, 24. And the Army had, the Human Resources Command had concluded that her heart injury from the vaccine was in the line of duty because she got the vaccine as part of the mandate. And that's like a watershed case right there, the acknowledgement within the DoD. And it did several million views on X, and it was the right call because several of the comments talked about they posted it on Facebook or they posted it on Instagram, and they were told they were violating the platform's rules. These platforms are so powerful now in terms of their reach. The Rubio interview, I hope that's not my phone, by the way. Is it me? It's probably That's right. It says Donald Trump. He owes me an interview. Yeah, he does. Anyway, sorry. My apologies. I'm that annoying person. So, the power of these platforms is really extraordinary. What I see is that this really is the next chapter for information and news and the media. You have to be pretty discerning about where you get your information. But I think that will become more sophisticated over time. The Rubio interview, which I'm all hoping you're going to go watch after, that was the full unedited interview that we released. I did that because I believe that with a newsmaker like that, a good correspondent is not afraid to show their work. You saw the whole thing. And it's a bit of a high wire act because you might stumble at some point or it might go a little sideways with the interview subject, but you have to I think you want to show your work. I think the transparency is important. And I also did it in the context of 60 Minutes and Kamala Harris to make the point that a big newsmaker, you can absolutely be transparent with the product, and that people like a longer form, transparent interview. And that interview did over 9 million views. And that is more engagement than any network broadcast, including 60 Minutes. So that shows you how broad it is. So I'm sure this will come up in the questions, but it's very sad to see what's happening at 60 Minutes with the Kamala Harris interview. As someone who grew up, watching that show and some of the tremendous reporting that has been done at that show, there's an argument that the edit's not news distortion. Just to kind of give you a little bit of the inside baseball, it's not a technical foul, the edit that they did, that started the FCC controversy. It was a very long answer, and they took just a small portion of that answer. But my training, which is very traditional training, is that the final product must reflect the quality of the interview itself. So if you interview someone who's really not very articulate, who has a lot of word salad responses, the final product should reflect that in some way, which is not what the 60 Minutes interview did. And in my view, that was news distortion. The edit was so heavy-handed. They could have done themselves a lot of favors by including one of her responses, which was, long and confusing, and having one line of track afterward that said, "If you found that answer confusing, so did we." It would have been a signal to the audience that it was less than presidential. But this will be for the president and the lawsuit and the FCC to ultimately decide. The final thought I will leave you with is that we are in the middle of an industrial revolution in the media. The technology is just, I can't even tell you how quickly the technology is changing. I'm doing this kind of reporting with 1.5 other people. There are 2.5 of us. One of us really is just a half because he's only in a few hours on these projects. But that's how tight it is. That's how small it's become because of the technology. And I think the question going forward is whether some of the corporate media, the large legacy media, whether they're going to sort of embrace more neutrality in their reporting or whether they're going to continue down this road where they're really hemorrhaging their audience and they're finding a new place with people like me on independent media. So I'd like to open it up for your questions. Okay, right over there. Tell me your name. Sorry? Oh yeah, go ahead, Charlie, yeah.
I would encourage everyone here to go look at her interviews.
Speak up.
Oh,
I would encourage everyone here to look at Catherine's interviews of individuals who suffer.
Kiss the mic.
Kiss the mic. I don't know. Anyway,
Hold it up to your mouth.
it's not working. So use your ears. Her interviews with victims of Havana syndrome broke the intelligence community's cover.
there we go. Yeah.
I would encourage.
It must be my phone.
The interviews that she did with victims, the facts that she brought to the public domain, gave the government no excuse not to take care of these people the way they need to be taken care of. And those interviews that she did are absolutely the best ever.
Thank you, Charlie. So Charlie's talking about my reporting on something called Havana syndrome. Havana syndrome is this a series of neurological and brain injuries, and these intelligence professionals, military operatives, law enforcement, and White House employees have been targeted by something called directed energy weapons. And directed energy weapons, there's sonic, there's microwave, but they basically, in the cavities in your skull, so your nose, your mouth, your ears, even the orbitals of your eyes become echo chambers, and it funnels the energy into your brain, which is a closed space, and it causes brain damage and disruption of the networks. And these national security professionals were made to feel like they were crazy, and they were gaslit on a level which was just cruel and morally wrong. And with the help of people like Charlie, who went on the record with me a couple of years ago, I've been able to open other doors with my reporting, and I've heard from some victims who were reluctant to speak for years. And the last administration put out an intelligence report saying it was unlikely that a foreign adversary or a novel weapon was responsible, but that is just not true. And it was such a disservice to these men and women, many of whom are extremely young and will never work again. And these brain injuries are progressive because once you disrupt the networks in the brain, The networks can't compensate as well over time, and the networks sort of disintegrate, and it leads to brain cell death and atrophy. And I recently interviewed a former counterintelligence officer at the NSA called Mike Beck, and he was hit on assignment in a hostile country in 1996. And he was diagnosed with Parkinsonism. Really, it's a Parkinson-like syndrome. 10 years later, when he was only 43, and he's now in assisted living at 63 because he's now got dementia and several other issues. And it's heartbreaking to see how these people have been really betrayed by their own government, having given so much. And this story in particular was so frustrating to me because he was eligible for workman's compensation because his injury was work-related, deemed to be work-related. But they were 3 months behind. The Labor Department, workers' comp, was 3 months behind on his assisted living payments. It was over $25,000. And it's just infuriating that the government is allowed to be that delinquent with a family that really has so little. So anyway, thank you, Charlie. It's we're not finished with it yet. But yeah, all right. Now you had a question over here. Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Why do you believe that the mainstream media has sold out the American public and lies and distorts the news on a constant, regular basis?
You know, someone asked me a similar question before the lunch, and I think that it's multifactorial. There's not just one explanation for it. In the 30-odd years that I've been working, news organizations increasingly have been bought by business interests. And so there's this imperative to drive to the ad revenue. People have allowed their personal bias to infect their reporting. I think there's a certain amount of sort of a lack of intellectual curiosity, sort of laziness. And what I mean by that is that I'm very old-fashioned in how I do my work. So if somebody tells me something, if you watch something that I do, I've actually gone back and I've made sure that there's some kind of underlying paperwork or there's other evidence to support their position. So it's taking the reporting to that extra step. So I appreciate your question. It's not straightforward. I think it's a combination of factors. But the good news here is that there are more options now to get your information. There are more independent options and smaller newsrooms and really specialized reporting. You don't have to just necessarily go to a site which is more generalized in its subject matter. Yeah, go ahead.
Along those lines, have you thought about collaborating with Barry Weiss and the Free
Oh, yeah.
Press?
Mm-hmm.
Or Megyn Kelly, she's now doing her own network or whatever, because I think you would actually fit in more, and I know like the Free Press is really expanding. They're going to have their own app. They're also Substack coming up soon. Have you thought about doing that?
You know, I've met with Barry Weiss and I've talked with Barry Weiss. And I don't want to give away too many secrets about maybe doing some projects in the future. I've done some projects with Michael Schellenberger. I don't know how many of you are familiar with him. We broke the story about the internal FBI chats, the gag order that was in place for the Hunter Biden laptop just before the election. I think that you're sort of, I think, getting to what the future looks like, which is that you'll have sort of consortiums of independent journalists working together, depending on the story or the topic, or you may have platforms that have news portals. So, for example, let's say you were on X and you're a blue checkmark person and you're paying $35 or $40 a month. Maybe you pay an extra $6 or $8 a month and you get access to the premium content in the news portal. A little bit like your cable package. But I think the entity that gets there first and figures out how to bring together these strong voices on larger projects or in a larger, like a consortium, I think will really move this ahead very quickly. Thanks for the question. Yep, go ahead.
Have you found that young people, because that's really what we want, young people to, they really don't watch TV news. Have they started listening to some of the stuff you're saying, that they're more open to, okay, we want to know the whole story?
So the question is, are you finding that young people are more open to knowing the whole story, and are they coming to these platforms? I can only give you anecdotal information. Our oldest son is 19, and he has some friends who subscribe to the newsletter, and I get feedback from, it's, they're much more, technologically literate, and I actually have found these platforms have, I think, opened me up to a much younger audience. And what's interesting to me is what matters to them is the authenticity and the credibility of the information. It doesn't matter that I could be their mother, right? Or grandmother, depending, right? So, and I think that's really encouraging, that they're looking, he explained it to me this way, that they're really looking for, a credible, reliable source of the information. And it doesn't really matter so much how old you are, which is, was kind of encouraging to me.
And how do you look so young?
Right. Well, anyway, I don't know. I had nothing to do with it. It's just, yeah. Go ahead.
My name is Maria.
Hi, Maria.
My son-in-law works in the administration. He's the guy that you would contact to get an interview with Donald Trump.
Okay, well, we'll talk after. Yeah. Let me tell you a little story. I don't want to speak out of school, but I've written about it, so I don't think it's any big secret. When you go to do a big interview with a president, you usually have a meeting in advance because they want to get sort of a feel for you to see if they even want to sit down with you, right? So I went to the White House to have my meeting, and going to the White House and going to the Oval Office is, a very big thing. And I was sitting in front of the Resolute desk, which is just this awesome looking desk. I mean, it's really kind of a magical piece of furniture, if that's even possible. And on the Resolute desk was this big red button. And like so many people, I'm sure, who've sat in that chair before, I just started looking at the button, and I'm thinking, wow, could that be the nuclear button? I'm my mind is really just going crazy. And of course, the president is sitting across the desk, and I'm not the first person to have done this. So he kind of leans over the desk, and he raises his hand. He goes, bang! I'm like, ah! And I'm thinking, what's just happened? And then this, I don't know if it's a door, something. This guy seemed to appear out of nowhere in this sort of butler's outfit and this tray of Diet Cokes, and he leaned over and he goes, "That's the best part of the job." So anyway, there's more I can say, but you know what? I'm not going to say it. I'm going to leave it right there. I'll take another question. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question, and it's basically the cover-up of Biden's cognitive issues.
Right.
And how angry it made me as someone who's in medicine to sit there and watch it, and the lies that were spun, and how no one in the press would say anything, with the exception of Fox News. And
My thoughts on that? Yeah. It's just, I just want to ask you, so what did you think was going on with him? Did you think it was Parkinson's?
I thought, of course, I can diagnose by sitting in the chair in my living room. I thought that he was late-stage Parkinson's.
Yeah.
Because of the stiffness, and then the cognitive starts to go after.
The dementia comes later. Right.
And do I know? No.
No, right. You're not the first person who said that to me, by the way, that they thought it was late-stage Parkinson's. So the question is, the President Biden's cognitive decline and why reporters didn't speak up about it. They're writing books about it now, but why didn't they speak up about it at the time? I remember being at CBS, and one of the things that struck me is that the White House would put a lid on the president's activities very early in the day, like 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, and a lid just means that there's no more activity, so the press pool's not going to be with him. And I thought this was very strange, and I thought, I wonder if he has sundowners, because after that period of time, it's a tough time of day. And I don't say that in a cruel way, I say that in a compassionate way. And one of the best things that could happen now is the Justice Department, I believe, could release the audio tapes from the special counsel Robert Hur investigation. I mean, I understand the sensitivities over revealing, the investigative steps or the posture they take in these depositions, but anyone who sat for a deposition knows that it's pretty straightforward what happens. So I don't think we're giving up any big government secrets. I think it's very important because I think this will give us a lot more clarity as to how significant the cognitive decline was in October of 2023, which is when he did the interview. And I think this would force more accountability with the journalists who covered the White House at that time, why they were so supine in their coverage of this. I also think, and I've said this in my newsletter, that after President Biden's very, very poor debate performance, ProPublica, which is an investigative website, it's more left of center, to their credit, released the videotape and a full transcript of their interview with President Biden in October of, either late September or early October 2023. And the timing matters because that's exactly when Robert Hur interviewed President Biden and concluded that his memory was so poor that he could not be prosecuted. And 60 Minutes also interviewed President Biden in that exact same window. And I believe, given the heavy-handed edit with Kamala Harris, I think that they should voluntarily release the transcript and the video from that interview. If you sit down with a major newsmaker and they are incoherent, or you have to do, or you feel compelled to do such a heavy edit, I mean, you're sitting on one of the biggest stories of your life. And the public would have been owed a window into that decline.
Ronald Reagan,
Over here?
at the very end, Ronald Reagan, they're saying that Nancy was more in charge because he was sort of, but also at the end, Biden gave so many
Pardons.
So if they find out that in fact...
It's too speculative. I don't know the answer to that. I think the most constructive thing would be the release of those audio tapes so the public can hear, where he was at. People have good days and bad days. I understand that. But if you sit down with the President of the United States and they are really struggling, that is your story, period. Okay, there's someone over here. Yeah, hi there.
Hi. So, do I understand that you have a newsletter?
Yes, that's correct.
And if so, how does one subscribe, and what is the cost?
Okay, that's a great question. So it's pretty easy to remember. It's CatherineHerridgeReports.com, and you can subscribe one of two ways. You can do a free subscription by adding your email address in the subscription bar, or if you want to have what they call premium content, so sort of bonus content, you can subscribe monthly, and it's $7 a month. And then if you subscribe, some people choose to subscribe for a year because it's cheaper to subscribe for the year. But I rely totally on subscriptions from the website and then also from X. I'm not taking third-party money, and I don't say this to disparage some of the other people who are working, but you would be surprised how many people have taken third-party money to do this kind of work, which I think may not infect the kind of reporting they do, but I think that if you can find a way to avoid it, it's best. Okay, yep.
Michelle Easton, being born in Canada, such
Yes.
a beautiful country, what do you think about the discussion of Canada?
Oh, it's the 51st state. Right. Strangely enough, when I interviewed Secretary Rubio, I asked him if that discussion was really serious. Now, this was back in February. And he said, well, let me tell you how that whole story got started. Justin Trudeau, who was then the prime minister, was meeting with President Trump and said, in effect, if you level the playing field in trade, we're going to cease to exist, to which President Rubio said he responded, well, then you should just become a state. That's apparently how the conversation started. The discussion of the 51st state has really galvanized Canadians around an issue. And I think that the discussion of the 51st state, President Trump's tweeting about this on the eve of the election, I think really swung the election to the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. I mean, it's really galvanized people. Only the president knows what's in his mind that way. Okay, yep.
For several years now, we see all the mainstream media picking on a key word, and they all say the same word.
Oh, right. I know what you're talking about, right.
I have a short question. Did Roger give you a bunch of stock options?
I'm trying to remember. I don't think so. I don't think so. It would have been, yeah, it would have been a good time. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, why is it that when you're watching the media, they seem to all use the same phrases, right? Well, I can't tell you exactly because I've never been someone who's received talking points and the other parties had confidence that I would use them. But I have seen talking points that have been circulated to reporters, and my guess is that the language is in the talking points or to members of Congress.
When you first walked to the podium, you said, I never go anywhere without my
Yes.
or my pen.
Yes.
Well, there's a group out there.
Oh, yes. Very active. Yeah. There's all sorts of noise on these platforms, and a lot of people write about the pen. To me, the pen is about marking up the documents. I've always been a big person on documents. And because I feel that people like to have something concrete that they can hold, right? Like, you're smart, you can read it for yourself, but it's good to have someone sort of curate it for you to show you what the important parts are. And maybe my greatest legacy is that all over social media, you see documents now with highlighters all over it, which I think is terrific, by the way. All right, so there's a whole discussion over whether my pen means something. My pen does not mean anything. Okay, it's just, I have some favorite pens, but yeah.
There was a kind of famous picture that went around of you outside of Guantanamo Bay.
Oh, yeah.
With the pen, they say follow the pen. And
I take that as a compliment to follow my work. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious, since it was really difficult for you to probe and get to the facts about Hunter Biden and then you were cut off, have you read Miranda Devine?
I've met Miranda Devine, and I've read some of her work, but I haven't read the entire book.
Got all that information that I was able to get out.
Well, it was all on the laptop. I mean, the laptop was just a gold mine of information and videos and all sorts of other things. I mean, all you had to, in fact, if you wanted to authenticate it, as one of the former business partners said to me, all you had to do was go to some of the cases in the federal courts and you'd see the same email traffic. Yeah. So I think maybe, I don't know how much longer we have. One more, two more?
there's a man in the back. One more.
One more. Okay, the man in the back. This man, I guess, is that you? Okay.
Let me ask you, off the record.
Oh, boy.
Turn off the videos.
On the Trump-Carney meeting, there hasn't been a lot of reporting that I'm aware of.
Right. I only saw what everyone else saw of the meeting, and Mark Carney has taken a very firm position on the tariff question. Of course, the 51st state, and President Trump is. I mean, this is a negotiation that we're seeing play out in real time. I'm very interested to see how this new trade deal in principle with the UK is going to impact that, because there was a discussion over whether you could kind of work around the US with some of the Europeans. So I'm just watching it like you're watching it, I'm afraid. I have no insight from up north-y. Okay, yeah. All right, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.